Hilche she'elu pikodin perik shlishi. Hashel is a parah michaveri. He made up that he's going to borrow a parah michaveri, and v'sholchale hamashal, the lender sent it biad bnei, biad shluchi, biad avdei. Afilu sholchale biad bnei, biad avdei, biad shluchi shel. So the mashal sent it biad bnei, biad avdei, biad shluchi shel. Umeisa koidim shetikonis l'shus hashel. Before the shale actually had a ma'aser kinyan on it, before it was nichlas l'shus hashel, it died. As there is a potter. In other words, the fact that he made up that he wants him to lend borrow something, that doesn't make him chay b'chiyuv shmira. The pale until he makes a ma'aser kinyan, so Mela only then is he chay b'chiyuv shmira, unless he clearly authorized him to go ahead and send it biad bnei biad shluchi, as we'll see b'hamshach. Now this din afilu sholchale biad bnei biad avdei biad shluchi shel sheil. So what's the story of the shluchi shel sheil? If the shliach, the shale sent a shliach in order to take the item, so he authorized the shliach to take the item. So why is the shale potter? So you can learn two ways. Either you learn pshat that biad shluchi shel doesn't mean he sent him specifically to take this item. He's a person that's shluchi shel sheil. He's someone that always does things, like he's a sucker of the sheil. So he's someone that does things for the sheil. But some learn also that Nachmer, that the Mishnah brings, also based on the Rambam earlier, that it depends. If L'moshel, he made him a shliach be'edim to go ahead and take the item, so then since he made a shliach be'edim, and then the mashal went ahead and gave it to him, so his taka becomes mechuyev. So that's then shluchi would be chayev. But if he authorized even him, he sent him to go ahead and take the item. But Lepel, he never told the mashal to go ahead and give it to him, even though he's made that he sent it to him to give it. But since Lepel, he never told the mashal to give it to him, and there's no Edom that he authorized him to give him. So if there's Edom, so it's kilo, the fact that he did it b'fnei Edom is kilo klor, that he's being megalad das, that he's willing to be mekabel achrayis. Masha'enkin, if there was no Edom and he just sent a shliach to get it, and he's made that he sent a shliach to get it, but Lepel, he never told the mashal to give it to the shliach, so even b'chiyah gavna, he's also potter. That's the Mishnah based on a Rambam and Hilchos Gzela. So let's read again the din. Hashel is a par michavere. He makes up to borrow a par michavere. V'sholchale hamashal biad bnei el biad shluchei biad avdei. No one authorized him to do it. He's made up that he's going to borrow it, but Lepel, he sent it biad bnei el biad shluchei biad avdei. And afilu sholchale biad bnei el biad avdei el biad shluchei shel sheil. And again, he wasn't clearly authorized to give it to them, to the sheil. Umeisa koidim shetikonis l'shus hasheil is a potter, so the sheil is potter. However, v'im omelei hasheil, the sheil clearly told the mashal, shilchali biad bni biad avdi biad shluchi, biad bincha biad avdecha ivri biad shluchacha. So mele, so these people are making a ma'aser kinyan on his behalf. Esha omelei hamashal hareini mishalchalcha biad bincha biad avdecha biad shluchacha, or biad bni, or biad avdi ha'ivri, or biad shluchi. And these people are in the position to make a kinyan on behalf of the shale, that the shale should become mechuyev b'chiyuvei shale. V'amalei ha'shale shlach v'sholchu meisa b'derech harizachayv, because it's considered that it was yotzem rishus hamashal and it was already nichlas rishus hashale. However, sholchuli hamashal biad avdi aknaini. If the mashal sent it biad avdi aknaini, afal pisha amalei ha'shale shlach, and lepelu meisa is potter. So in other words, in order for the shale to become mechuyev, it has to be that it went out of the rishus hamashal and it went into the rishus hashale. So if Lepel, the shale, authorized him to send it in all these shluchim, so Lepel, so that's considered that it went into the rishus hashale. These people got it for the shale. The shale authorized that they should get it for him. Masha'enkin, if it's Utomar and Evet Knainis, even though it was authorized, but Lepel, it never left the Mashal's domain, because Lepel Yad Evet Yad Rabbi. So therefore, even though it was authorized, but Lepel, since it never left the domain of the Mashal, so therefore the Shale never became Chayv. Now, Amalei HaShale Hakisha B'Makal, V'hitavi Elai Me'ela, and it left the Shale's Rishus, the Mashal's Rishus, but it never really entered into the Shale's Rishus. V'asa Mashal Kain, is Ein HaShale Chayiv Bo, Ad Shetikonos L'Shusei, Avul Mesa B'derech Potter, because Lepel, since the shale never was koina, in order for the shale to become mechuyev, it has to be that he was koina the animal with kinyoni sheila. That's when he becomes mechuyev and chiyuvi sheila. Masha'enkin, the fact that the mashal was hikisha b'makal, so Lepel, he did what the sheil told him to do. And Lepel had left the mashal's rishus, so to speak. But since Lepel, there was no ma'aseh kinyan on behalf of the sheil, so Memela, the sheil doesn't become mechuyev, and therefore if it died baderech, he's potter. So we're speaking about, in order for the sheil to become chayiv, it has to be nichnas l'rshusei. Either nichnas l'rshusei mamish, or it was nichnas l'rshus of someone he authorized to give it to him, and then it should be nichnas l'rshusei. That's how it's nichnas l'rshusei. Except with the exception of an Evet Knaini, where even though he authorized him, but Lepel, it never left the mashal's rshus. So Mele, it can't be nichnas l'rshus of the sheil. Now v'chein b'shor shemachzira hasheil l'bailam. When the sheil is being mazil l'bailam, is im sholcha b'yadacher, umeisa kedem shtagir l'rshus ha-mashal, and is a chayiv, because as long as it's still in the rishus of the sheil, so the sheil is chayiv, b'chiyuv v'sheila. Sha'adayin hi b'achrayas ha-sheil, it's still b'achrayas ha-sheil, until it actually goes back into the mashal's rishus. However, v'im sholcha midas ha-mashal, ayidei acher umeisa potter, because the mashal was saying they send it with this person, so basically this person is going to be receiving it on behalf of the mashal. That person is receiving it on behalf of the mashal. Him sholcha midas hamashal idiyachur meisa potter. However, sholcha biyad avdei aknaini. If he sent it biyad avdei aknaini, afal pisha amali hamashal shlach aber meisa baderech chayiv. Why? Because yad evet ki yad rabbi, and therefore v'adayin leyotzis miyad hashel. So even though the mashal told the shel, send it biyad your evet knaini. But lepel, since it's still b'rshus hashel, so the shel is still mechuyev b'chiyuvei shmira, mechuyev al shel, until it actually goes into the yad hashel, or the yad of someone which is not yad evet ki yad rabbi, and he gets it on behalf of the mashal. Now, b'medvar mamurim, this din, that it's not considered that it left the sheil and didn't come to the mashal until it either came actually to his rishus, or someone was coined on behalf of the mashal, someone that's not the evet knaini of the sheil. This whole din that the sheil still has the din of a sheil, if it's still, he's returning it during the time that he still has the din of a sheil. In other words, he borrowed it for 30 days, and Lepel, he's returning it during those 30 days. Or he borrowed it indefinitely, and he's returning it while he's still borrowing it indefinitely. If he was already finished the Yimei Sheilasa, and Lepel, he was Marze B'yad Acher, is Hareza Potter Mesa Baderach. Why? Shahashe'ela Achar Yimei Sheilasa is Yotzis Medin She'ela V'arei Kishem Risachrala. When a person borrows an item, and the time of his right to borrow it is up, so it goes out from being a she'ela and becomes a shemer sachar. So even though he's not getting paid for it, but since Lepel he was nana from it while he was a she'el, so therefore Chazal gave him the din that after he made a she'el, he should have a din of a shemer sachar, even though L'chura right now he's really a shemer chinam. But on the other end, because he had the she'ela, so he's considered a shemer sachar. Lefichach im nishbes im mesa achri yimei she'ela pater v'chein kol kiyetze b'zeh. So Mela and all that is if it'll be biyad of someone that he's giving it, sending it to, and something happened that was an oinus, so then he would be potter, because Lepel, he's no longer a din of a sheil, he has a din of a shemer socher, and that din would happen also in his own house, lav dafke baderech. Halacha Gimel. Now we know that a sheil is chayiv even for oinsim, even when it was mesa. A seicher, on the other hand, is only chayiv for gneva v'aveda, and he's not chayiv for oinsim. Now, what happens if a person borrows an animal, and Lepel, this same animal, he's borrowing it part of the time and he's renting it part of the time, or he borrowed two animals, or he has two animals, one animal he borrowed and one animal he rented, and Lepel becomes a question: when did it die, or which one died? Did it die b'shas it was a schura and memela the seicher is potter? Or did it die while he was a shol, and Memela the shol is chayiv? And al der is which one died? Did the shol die or the sacher died? So Memela, that's the din. If there's a suffix, which one died? So the rule is hameis mechaver el varaya, and even if Lepel, the mashal is a bari, and the shol is a suffix, so Memela l'chur is bari v'shema. But nevertheless, with Rambam Paskin that bari v'shema, still we say hameis mechaver el varaya. Don't say bari yodif. And Memela, so over here also, if there's a suffix which behema died, if it's b'shas ha'she'el or b'shas ha'schirus, or the shol, or the socher, so the din is that hametz mechaver al varay. That's the halacha. Halacha gimel. Hasheil porem michaveri. Shal chatzi hayem v'socher chatzi hayem. Or shal hayem v'socher l'macher. Or shal achas v'socher achas. He borrowed two. There was two. One was borrowed and one was rented. And lepel mesa achas mem. Hamashalei meshula mesa. Either he says, in the case where he borrowed two, he says the shula was mesa. Or b'yem shoyis shula mesa. When he borrowed one day he borrowed and one day he rented it. He says b'yem shoyis shula mesa. And in the case where it was a half a day and a half a day, he's tining the shale, the mashal, b'shosh shoyis shula mesa. And v'ashem I don't know. I don't really know which one died or when it died. Oi, fakert, shamer hashemer, the shamer is saying for sure, schura mesa, or b'yem shoysa schura mesa, or b'shosh shoysa schura mesa, and b'amashal emeini yedeh, or a shamer zeini yedeh, v'zeimi yedeh, they're both arguing. Mele dinin is ames mechaver el varaya, because lepel, since the shale is a muzik, so the muzik keeps the money. You can't be moitzi mammon from a muzik shleikadin. However, loy hoysa shamraya, there was no raya. So what's the din? Is Yishava Hashemer Sheschura Mesa? Either he swears Sheschura Mesa, Eish Eini Yedeh, or he swears Sheini Yedeh, V'yapata. Now, Zeh Eimer Sh'ula Mesa, V'zeh Meschura Mesa. If Lepel, they're arguing, before we were talking about one was either, both were Eini Yedeh, one was Eini Yedeh. What happens if each one is tiny that I know? Zeh Eimer Sh'ula Mesa. Notice the Mashal is saying the Sh'ula Mesa. V'zeh Meschura Mesa. So first of all, Yishava Hashemer Ala Schura Shemesa Kedarka. There's he has to say that it was Mesa Gedarka. That's a chiyuv shemrim. There's the chiyuv before was a chiyuv derabbanan. There was no chiyuv deraisa. It wasn't chiyuv hashemrim. Lehoisha shamraya yishava hashemer sheschura Mesa sheini yedeh v'yipota, which is only a shvuas heses. Masha'inkin over here zeimer sheula Mesa v'zeimer schura Mesa. There's a tainas vadai, and he's taining schura Mesa. First of all, yishava hashemer ala schura shemesa kedarka. So that he has to swear shvur deraisa, which is the regular din of shvuas hashemrim. Lefi dvarav, the schura was Mesa, so he has to swear that schura is Mesa. K'mei ton, and the yigalgalov shaschura isha Mesa. Then you should say that there was taka the schura that was Mesa, not the shul was Mesa. So Mela was like a gilgal shvur of a shvur deraisa, which is vice stronger than just a regular shvur heses. That would be a gilgal shvur of a shvur deraisa. Lepel, what's coming out here is that even though there's a suffix, you definitely borrowed a behemah. That's the case. You definitely borrowed a behemah. Now the question is, did you return this behemah? In other words, the shaila is, did you return this behemah? Let's say case two behemahs. You have two behemahs. You borrowed one behemah and you rented one behemah. So the question is, did you return the borrowed behemah? Did the rented behemah die, and now you're returning the borrowed behemah? Or no, the borrowed behemah died and you're returning the rented behemah. So that's the question. So you definitely rented a behemah. And the question is whether you returned that rented behemah. So here we're learning that since there's a suffix whether or not sh'ula mesa or schura mesa, so therefore hametz mechaver al varaya. But l'chura you could think otherwise. There's a makom, the mukyesa is this kasha. The l'chura you could think otherwise. Say like this: you definitely borrowed the behemah. When you borrowed the behemah, at that point in time, you became mechuyev to return this behemah. Regardless, you became mechuyev to return this behemah, even if an oinus occurs. And that chiyuv was chal b'shas ha'sheila v'horaya. We had the din before in Perek Aleph. We had the din that if a person, let's say, borrows a behemah and then he dies, and then the behemah dies, so the children have no chiyuvim of sheila because they were never mekabel chiyuv of sheila. But if there's nechosim from the father that these children yashned, so those nechosim have to be used to pay back for that behemah. How did it become a chiyuv on those nechosim? So the pshat is because as soon as a person borrows the behemah, so he becomes mechuyev to return that behemah, and that chiyuv to return the behemah is chal even on his nechosim. So it's chal b'shas ha'sheila. It's just and memela later on when it's an honest. That's not when the chiyuv occurs. The chiyuv occurred earlier b'shas ha'sheila. So as soon as a person borrows a behemah, he becomes mechuyev to return that behemah, and it becomes even a shibud on his nechosim for that behemah. At kedei kach that if he dies, and then the behemah dies, so the children have to pay from those nechosim. So it became a shibud nechosim. So now the question is, did he ever pay back the behemah? So fakert. So why are we saying it Hametz mechaver el varaya? Kilo there's a suffix whether it became a chiyuv, whether the shol died. L'chura fakert. There definitely was a chiyuv. Because as soon as there was a sheila, it became a chiyuv to return it. And the shaila is whether he fulfilled his chiyuv, whether he returned it or not. So Mimela, it's a vade chiyuv, it's a safik piroin, so the din should be that you have to pay. So why are we saying that the din is that you don't have to pay? By a safik, you don't have to pay, even if the mashal is a vade and the shale is a suffix, so we say Amesim Mechaver El Varai. That's the kasha that the Mukiyesiv asks on this Rambam. So you're going to have to say pshat is that be'emes, if later on something happened, so then it becomes l'mafreya the chiyuv b'shas ha'sheila. In other words, you have to learn that it's not the pshat the mamish became a chiyuv b'shas ha'sheila, it became a shibud nechosim. The shibud nechosim happens l'mafreya if later on he doesn't return it, but we don't really know if he didn't return it. So maybe that whole goof is a suffix whether or not there was l'mafreya the kishibud b'shas ma'is. It's not so clear. But the shaila is clear that the chura, if we learn that there became a shibud b'shas ha'sheila, so the chura, so why should later on there be a din that's hameis mechaver el varai if akert is a vade chiyuv? But I'll call upon him. That's the din. Halacha dalet. Now here the Rambam speaks about the dinim of meida b'miktzas. When a person is meida b'miktzas ataina, so then he's chayev a shvua on the other taina, which is not being meida, and then there's a din that if a person has a chiyuv shvua and a person is a meida b'miktzas, if this person says you owe me $100 and he says $50 I taka owe you, so if he says $50 I owe, $50 I don't owe you, so he has to swear on the $50 that he says he doesn't owe. But if he says $50 I owe you and the other $50 I don't know, so the din is that since there's a chiyuv shvua on the other 50 and he's claiming he doesn't know, so therefore so this din applies also over here by a sheil. If a person comes along and says, you owe me 2 paras because the 2 paras died by you while they were shulim, and he's saying one of the paras taka died by me while I was a shul, but the other para I don't know, ain't he there? So the din is mitei she'eni yachol lishav mishal. That's this halacha. Halacha dal. Hish'ilo ishtei paras. He lent him 2 paras. Chatzi ayim b'sheila v'chatzi ayim b'schilas. Chatila, the deal was that half of the day is going to be b'sheila. It's in the first half of the day I'm lending it to you, and the second half of the day you have a din of schilas. Now hamashal lema, the mashal is tiny b'zman ha'sheila mesu shteim. They both died b'zman ha'sheila. V'halo emer, and the sheil is saying achas is taka mesu b'zman sheilasa. One of them taka died b'zman sheilasa, aber v'hacheres ain't there. The other one I don't know when it died. So the din is miteich she'eni yachol lishav yishal mashtayim. So in other words, he's a meida b'miktzas on one, and the other one he can't swear because he's saying ain't there. So therefore he has to pay both. V'chein, the same din applies. And masel is sholish paras. He gave him 3 paras. Shtayim sheulis v'achas chura. One was 2 a shol and 1 was chura. And amashalei meshtayim hasheulis hein shemesu. 2 of them died. And he says the 2 that died were shulis. V'asheilei meha'achas hasheulah meisavade. Taka, you're right. One of them for sure was the shol. Aval hashniya shemesa, but the other one that died, any yedem, he hasheila acheres. If that was the other one that was shul, he has So again, miteich she'eni yochel ishava, shari'ei me'eni yedeh, zishalom hashnayim. So that's the same principle, that since he's a meida b'miktzas, and on the other miktzas he's saying eni yedeh, so therefore miteich she'eni yochel ishava, mishalom. Now, Behilchas Tein, B'nitni Yisbar Din Zeh, Ki'etzebei B'chol HaTeinim, She'eni Yechelun L'Shava, whenever there's a Tein and he's Eini Yochel L'Shava, V'ketzed Mishalman, U'meiz Tamim Mishalman. In what situation do we say that B'tech She'eni Yochel L'Shava Mishalman, and why does he pay? That will be explained in Hilchas Tein V'nit.